and Democracy. Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, the title of my speech today is Judgment and Democracy. There are, as we read in our daily papers and also see on television, many organisations and terrorist groups facing dilemmas at the present time. Coming to immediate mind is Al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden. There is also the Taliban, now filtering back into Afghanistan from Pakistan, and recently we've had Hezbollah in Lebanon, backed by the Assyrians and the Iranians, also in a struggle with Israel. But there is one organisation in the Western world facing the biggest and gravest dilemma of all time. In fact, the biggest dilemma in history, ever. This organisation was simply called Majestic. The history of the organisation called Majestic is in itself a truly remarkable story. An organisation that started small but is now colossal. Its dilemma is when to formally announce that extraterrestrial contact has been established. This to a fledgling and a squabbling world, but also a world that has to grow up quickly in the not too distant future. For once it has been formally stated, we will, whether we like it or not, have moved into a completely new era. It is a strange fact that virtually everyone in the Western world has heard of Al-Qaeda and knows its spiritual leader, but barely anyone has heard of an organisation called Majestic, let alone know who its leaders are. Yet, it is this very organisation that is going to direct and shape the future for mankind. For we as a species are slowly but surely entering into a new community with a lot of help from our friends. But it is this organisation's timetable and the manner in which it does so, also the implications to our peoples of just how Majestic does formally announce that extraterrestrial contact has been established, that concerns me. Majestic was formed after an executive order by the then US President Harry Truman, sometime around 1947. It was headed by America's most senior scientific and military experts, with a few senior politicians involved initially. It's my understanding that there were 12 people in charge of this organisation at the time. Majestic was established directly after the crash of a UFO in Roswell, New Mexico, where not only was the crashed UFO recovered, but its occupants too were also recovered. In addition, prior to this crash, there were numerous UFO sightings and incidents during the Second World War and directly afterwards. It was then that the President, Harry Truman, realised that something extraordinary was happening around the world and over America. It was not long before it was established that UFOs were real and not an illusion, that they were extraterrestrial in origin. Finally, that they were not pilotless objects but had occupants flying them. Majestic was then given a mandate to try and establish contact with the extraterrestrials visiting Earth. This, I believe, was achieved around the early 1950s. Contact was not only sought with one group of visitors, but was established with others as well. From this moment on, we have been in the new era for mankind. Majestic, since its creation around 1947, has run parallel to every elected administration, right up to the present day. It has been funded through black budgets to retain its secrecy. As an organisation that started small, it is now colossal. Who its unelected leaders are and who are those administering this organisation, I genuinely do not know. Since 1947, this organisation and its members have faced literally unimaginable dangers in the dealings with extraterrestrials. The list of this organisation's achievements is virtually endless. Its members from the very beginning started from scratch with no knowledge at all of who they were dealing with or what they were going to face. The only facts they knew were whoever was visiting the Earth was without doubt and more technologically advanced than ourselves and probably hundreds of years ahead of us. What their mission in coming here was, not known. During President Nixon's era, Majestic as it was then formed into a total satellite government outside the control of Washington, D.C. This provided cover for the visitors, plus a totally new concept for protecting all information relating to the subject. Indeed, it is this satellite government's role to interface with extraterrestrial visitors, whether they be friend or foe. It is interesting that the greatest challenge this satellite government has yet to face has yet to happen. But to those in Majestic, let me state, we are now in the most defining moment of this century. Be under no illusion about this. For what happens in the not too distant future will shape how mankind moves forward into this our new era for the next century or more. In the book, written by Colonel Philip J. Corso, retired the day after Roswell, we are given a first-hand glimpse of how crashed alien craft artifacts have been reverse engineered. Indeed, from the very beginning of Majestic until today, an entirely new technological industry and era has been achieved, from the integrated circuit chip to Silicon Valley in 50 years. The list also includes image intensifiers, fiber optics, super tenacity fibers, molecular alignment, metallic alloys, particle beams, electromagnetic propulsion systems, and lasers, to name but a few. Majestic's success in protecting mankind from the shock that we are far from alone in the universe has been completely successful. For the last 60 years, the subject has been shrouded in secrecy. The magnificent job you have done in keeping from us, the ordinary citizens, that we are not alone is in itself a truly remarkable achievement. The dilemma of when to formally announce that contact has been established is a very difficult one to make. Indeed, I could spend hours debating the pros and cons, the rights and wrongs, specifically about this issue. However, this speech is an open speech to all members of this satellite government formally called Majestic. Indeed, my speech is about judgment and democracy. The total success in protecting mankind from the shock that we are not alone has been achieved. That from me is not in question. Indeed, I can only say you have done a spectacular job in hiding this very truth. Your efforts to reverse engineer the technology from crashed extraterrestrial craft has changed our current society for the majority of the citizens of our world, and I am sure will continue to do so for the next 50 years. Again, you have done a superb job. The fact that we have established contact with numerous extraterrestrial visitors, some benevolent, some not, visitors from other worlds bringing a wealth of knowledge to us, a fledgling world in its bureaucracy, is of course truly amazing. But what is truly amazing is that virtually all of our elected politicians are unaware of this. Fact, not fiction. My father's generation endured the Second World War. His youth, from 17 years of age, was spent in the merchant navy, dodging U-boats and torpedoes for the duration of the greatest conflict in our history. His entire generation gave their all in the fight for freedom and democracy. I probably do not need to remind you of the cost of this generation in terms of life and blood. Ruined lives in totally destroyed countries, the whole of Europe and the Pacific, a total and complete bloodbath, Europe in devastation. This, my father's generation, fought for democracy. The United States, Great Britain and the Soviet Union lost many, many millions of lives in the fight, but democracy prevailed. It is important to remember that this generation has not completely passed away. Yet, the very democracy that they fought for and many millions gave their lives for is today a very different democracy indeed. Currently, democracy is unaware even of the era we are in. The elected representatives of the United States and Great Britain are virtually all in complete ignorance regarding this matter. Such is the sorry state of our democracy. But this speech is not a challenge to your authority in your dealings with extraterrestrials. But this speech is about judgment and democracy. I am sure that such an intelligent organisation as yourselves, with some of the best brains in the world, would have formulated a timetable as such to prepare the world for the inevitable news of our contact with visitors from other worlds. But my very reason for speaking is very simple. It is morally repugnant to me that I, as an ordinary citizen, that I, as the humblest elected member of a mere city councillor for the St John and All Saints Ward of Winchester, that the elected representatives of my nation, the members of Parliament, know nothing of such long-established contact with visitors from other worlds. Let me reiterate, long-established contact. But worse still, the greatest democracy in the world, the country with the greatest people. Let me tell you, I love Americans. The greatest democracy in the world as we know it, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The congresswomen, the congressmen, the senators, the elected representatives of the most powerful nation in our world are virtually all in ignorance of Majestic's established contact with visitors from other worlds. Because they do not know, they have not been told, cynically bypassed. So successful has the cover-up been by this organisation that for the past 40 years or more, virtually every member of the Congress and the Senate and my Parliament has been ignorant of the fact we have established extraterrestrial contact, that we've been having a continued dialogue for the last 40 years or more. Even as I speak, the elected representatives of the greatest nation in the world are deliberately being kept out of the loop. This, I must repeat, is morally repugnant to me. That I, as the merest of any elected citizen, know what is going on, and they do not, is simply unacceptable. While I do believe the programme of protecting mankind from the news that we are not alone has been exemplary, this until it was deemed we are ready for such news. It is obvious to me there will be no panic now, for we are a very different generation than 40, 50 years ago. But I must state categorically here and now, I believe your timetable to be fatally flawed. Indeed, it is very clear to me the scant regard you have shown to the elected representatives of the greatest nation on earth, let alone my parliamentarians, that the time has come that I must speak as a law-abiding citizen and now elected councillor for the Liberal Democrats in St John of All Saints ward in Winchester, that I must speak on behalf of my elected colleagues in the United States and the United Kingdom. This because the elected members of the greatest democracy in the world and my Parliament simply are not in the know. They have not been informed by Majestic, now US Space Command. The satellite government established for the biggest undertaking in the world's history, America and Britain's relationship with extraterrestrials. Indeed, the Senate, the Congress and the Parliament have been treated as if they were a mere parish council by this organisation. We now have a democracy where virtually all its elected members are unaware of the era we are in. Its very dealing and decision-making with other nations in our world in real time and their peoples is flawed. This is a very dangerous time and a dangerous situation for mankind. Already, the transition into a new era is not going well. Such is the state of our democracy. Indeed, how we deal with one another at this time in our history is crucial to my convictions of why I am speaking today. To all members of US Space Command and its organisation, whether you are civilian, military or scientific, I want to say how much I respect you, the challenges you must have faced and still face, the decisions you will have had to take as we in our infancy have finally emerged into a new era. Indeed, as we look back at our modern world today, because of your success in back engineering items from crashed alien craft, that we have fibre optics, silicon chips, lasers and particle beams, etc. The very world we live in has literally been transformed in the last 50 years. This mainly down to your guidance. Colonel Corso has a lot to answer for in a lot of this success. Indeed, the new industrial revolution of nanotechnology has Majestic written all over it. The dangers your members will have faced during these initial years probably beggars belief, for clearly the community we are emerging into, some are benevolent and some are not. But this is your territory and for you to explain. It is not for me to steal your thunder. The very notion that an ordinary law-abiding citizen, now elected City Councillor for St John of All Saints, ward of Winchester, may speak on behalf of the elected parliamentarians the United Kingdom is nothing short of miraculous, but this is exactly what I am doing now. I am extremely honoured and privileged. The responsibility of such an action has not gone unnoticed by myself. Should the elected members of Parliament wish to hold me to task for this action, I am accountable, full stop. But I, Adrian Hicks, am speaking on your behalf, for it is my belief certain knowledge has been deliberately withheld from the oldest democracy in the world. More importantly, from virtually all its elected members. It is this reason alone why I have stood and been elected as a Liberal Democrat, that I might speak on behalf of my elected colleagues. For the unelected part of the satellite government has not informed the elected representatives of the legitimate government of what is going on. Fact, not fiction. But I must reiterate, I speak to all in this organisation with the greatest of respect and humility. The very stance your organisation finds itself in is at first glance very complex, but to me on the outside it is extremely simple. I shall sum up the current situation. The elected representatives of the greatest nation on earth and the elected representatives of the United Kingdom have virtually all been deliberately kept out of the loop regarding our nation's dealings with extraterrestrials. So successful has the cover-up been, virtually no one elected is in the know. The unelected leaders of this organisation have deliberately kept the elected representatives on both sides of the Atlantic from getting into the picture. Indeed, this speech may come as a total surprise to many of our elected representatives in both our nations. But when an ordinary citizen, now elected city councillor, knows more than virtually all the elected representatives of the greatest nation on earth, including those of my nation, and has seen the visitors with my own eyes for over 10 minutes, common sense tells you the timetable is fatally flawed. When a base commander somewhere has a sense of humour and allows one of our visitors out on a jolly on a busy Saturday for a stroll up the high street in the early afternoon in the spring of 2004, I should like to state too that I have a sense of humour. My humour is such that I joined a political party. I went through a strenuous selection process to be able to stand as a candidate for the Liberal Democrats. I have fought 2 elections. The first I lost by 27 votes in 2006, the second I won in 2007. This to be able to speak on my elected colleagues' behalf. Indeed, this is no knee-jerk reaction, for I have deliberately allowed time to pass. Indeed, the question I as a Liberal Democrat wish to ask you is this, a question which I am sure all the elected representatives who are not in low would want me to ask first. Are you for democracy or are you against democracy? For depending on your answer or your silence, the next 100 years of our future will depend. My father's generation will be watching this with eagle eyes. What do you think the men who died on Amber Beach would think about the situation where the truth was being kept from the very elected representatives that the people, very people of our great nations have voted in office, and this by the unelected? Yet, your timetable does not include this, the most important first step in any programme of informing our world, that of formally informing the elected representatives of your own nation and mine about your nation's involvement with extraterrestrials. This is why I'm here and speaking now. I find it truly incredulous that in our year 2009, the unelected organisation started by President Nixon, started by President Truman, then in the President Nixon era was formed into a satellite government outside the control of Washington, D.C., purely to interface with our visitors, now part of Space Command, has not interfaced with its own elected representatives, the senators, the congressmen, and the men in my parliamentarians. Ladies and gentlemen of this organisation, after 50 years of running parallel to every elected administration, I must point out that I, as an ordinary citizen, will not know or can guess the projected timetable you will be following, but I am going to tell you why I believe your timetable is fatally flawed. So far, you as an organisation have paid scant regard to the elected representatives of the Senate, the Congress, and indeed my Parliament. May I politely point out the wonderful people of America have voted in office their elected representatives in the Congress and the Senate, and indeed a new president. In my country, we are nearing a general election. These are the people's choices. It is an act of crass stupidity to believe the elected representatives of the greatest nation on earth don't matter. We will inform them later, at our convenience, when we are ready, when it suits us. They do not need to know now. Well, people of this organisation, may I, Adrian Hicks, formally request that your organisation start the programme of officially announcing to the world of your nation's involvement with our extraterrestrial neighbours by starting with, in the first instance, your own nation's and my nation's elected politicians. This, the most important first step of any such programme. I wish to say 8 specific words to you. I implore, I plead, I beg, simply, please inform the elected politicians of your great nation and mine as to where you are at with your nation's greatest undertaking. Earlier in my speech, I said it is interesting that the greatest challenge this satellite government has yet to face has yet to happen. This until now, this until this moment in time. This challenge will not be from any one person, I include myself, or any one political group or party, but it will be from the ordinary American citizen and the ordinary British citizen. But you know, these citizens fall into two very distinct categories. The first category is those who have lived and fought for our nations in the Second World War. Also in this category I include all who have served in our nation's armed forces and services since 1939, up until this very moment. The second category is those who have not. It is the former who will be your harshest judges. For this generation and these people not only know the cost of everything, they also know the value of everything. Indeed, the very cost of this generation and these people in life and blood for the very cause of democracy and freedom is totally immeasurable. It is they who will be watching you with eagle eyes. For this generation has not yet completely passed over, and yet still the most important first step of any program to inform our world of our nation's involvement with our extraterrestrial neighbours has not happened. That of formally announcing to our elected politicians in the Senate, the Congress and my Parliament has not happened. Up until this moment of time, I have always been an advocate of gradual disclosure. But because the timetable is so fatally flawed, indeed there has been a point of time reached where the very question of whether you are for democracy or against democracy has actually now emerged. When the humblest elected councillor is asking this question on behalf of his elected colleagues, imagine when the good citizens of our nations ask this very same question. Would you still tell your children Father Christmas exists at the age of 9, coming up to 10? We as Liberal Democrats exist to build and safeguard a fair, free and open society in which we seek to balance the fundamental values of liberty, equality and community, and in which no one shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. I should like to repeat, no one should be enslaved by ignorance, especially my elected colleagues in the Senate, the Congress and my Parliament. Majestic, or should I perhaps call it US Space Command, is an incredible organisation. But you have to decide whether you have achieved enough before not only becoming visible, the word I'm looking for here is accountable. For clearly once it has been formally established that contact has taken place, not only will things have changed for mankind, for every citizen in our world, things will have changed completely for US Space Command. There will be no going back. The entire world's eyes will be watching. The responsibility of representing mankind is awesome enough in itself. To do so as an unelected organisation is an even bigger burden. There must be no doubt left at all that you are totally for democracy. I believe the organisation and the people of Majestic, now the United States, US Space Command, have served our world and the United States to the best of their ability. In fact, I would describe them and their efforts to date as incredible. But again, I wish to voice my concern to you. Should the timetable be wrong, which I believe it is, the wonderful people of our two respective nations, Great Britain and the United States, also the elected politicians of both nations, will be deemed together and responsible for misleading and deceiving the entire world. Every nation and all of mankind concerning this matter, the consequences to the people of our two nations could be immeasurable. We could end up being viewed by mankind as the scum of the earth, the arch deceivers. These are the stark and very real realities of the current situation. This because the unelected organisation did not get the timetable right through lack of judgment. Gentlemen and ladies of this organisation, the time has come that the elected be informed of the era that we are now in. I do not think this request to be unreasonable for what is very clearly at stake here. The ramifications of getting this timetable wrong, to our peoples and our elected politicians who are not in the loop, would be as quick as shit going through a goose. On behalf of the ordinary citizens of my country and the United States, we must never be perceived to be the scum of the earth, the arch deceivers. I repeat, we must never be perceived to be the scum of the earth, the arch deceivers. But the most important thing for me, though, is that the people of Majestic, now US Space Command, who have done a phenomenal job for our world. One only has to look back at the last 40 years to see how we as a world have progressed, to realise what an incredible job they have achieved. We are now into the next industrial revolution, that of nanotechnology, a revolution that in the next 40 years will literally transform our world. This again, due to Majestic guidance. These people who have served our world equally must never be perceived to be the traitors of mankind. For in reality, they are the unknown heroes of our world, the modern day Davy Crockett's. That is why the timetable is so very important. To those of you who have listened to my open speech, who have come to realise where we are at in our history, but who perhaps are saying, why us? Why me? The answer is, because we're here, and it's now, and it's time. This is one patriot talking to the patriots of US Space Command. Please hear me. I'm yours respectfully, Adrian Hicks. It did change my life, and 2 elections later it has done. My name is Adrian Hicks. My occupation is I'm an orthopaedic casting technician, and I've been doing this job for 36 years. Conservatively, I've treated a minimum of 300,000. In all probability, it's well over 500,000. I was a member of the Royal Observer Corps for quite a few years, which is attached to the RAF. Well, yes, it had been a very busy week that week. I'd gone to St. Cross for a drink at lunchtime. The town was heaving. I came back into town at about 1:15. I walked into town to the Works bookshop, browsed around, came out, and it was then that I looked down the high street and I observed a very odd looking woman, or female. It was the gait that struck my attention, because she clearly wasn't walking like you or I. It was more penguin fashion, and the arms were doing this motion as opposed to us walking like so. Well, I observed this being for 9 minutes, I guess. I went ahead of her twice. She was humanoid, but she was not a human being. The eyes are in orbits as opposed to sockets. Her eyes were quite big, actually. She had bright blonde hair, very unusual clothes, of course. I think she would have done. She was clearly at ease amongst us. She had a great sense of humour. It was very interesting because she was laughing quite often. And she was obviously aware that she thought nobody had recognised who she was, because she clearly wasn't one of us. It was absolutely lovely, actually. It was my choice not to speak to her, as opposed to her choice not to speak to me. I really didn't want to disturb her, because she was clearly having a good time, taking it all in, and particularly the architecture. That's very clear. My first thoughts were probably the same as the mayor of Hiroshima, because I clearly said, "What the f*** was that?" as she walked past. And then she stopped, literally, as I said those words. She stopped literally 6 feet away from me. And she took in the buttercross and the clock above one of the banks in the high street. And I mean, she stayed there for a good couple of minutes, just taking it all in. And she was literally, as I say, maybe 7 feet away. She was lovely. About 9 minutes. Yes, about 9 minutes. Because I went ahead of her twice. I went up to Russell Bromley's and she was moving very slowly. She wasn't in a rush. And she wasn't fazed or scared. And she was really thoroughly enjoying herself amongst us. It was lovely to watch. No, it isn't. It's quite interesting because there have been two other sort of UFO contactee events in Winchester. One was in 1976 and 77, the other in 1977. These happened to Joyce Bowles and Ted Pratt. Now, if you Google these names, you'll get the sequence of events up. Well, I think there's certain things that should come out and certain things that shouldn't. Clearly, we have established contact. I don't think it's particularly in anybody's interest to know where the base is. But I do think it's in everybody's interest to know that we have established contact. Yes, I stood specifically for this issue. No other reason. I think it's very important that the elected politicians, particularly of the United States, but also our nation, know where we are at in the era we are and the era that we are in. And this will change how we deal with one another, and it will change certainly the education system of our nation, defence policy, foreign policy, these sorts of things. It's very important that we know where we're going. I have absolutely no wish to go any further politically at all. Being a councillor is bad enough. Well, my speech, Judgment and Democracy. How America has evolved in charge of this sort of matter. Really, it's ultimately aimed at the US Space Command now. Formerly, there was an organisation which was codenamed Majestic. It somehow then drifted into some sort of satellite government sort of arrangement. I don't really know. I'm not privy to these facts. But without a doubt now, US Space Command is in charge of this matter. And so, consequently, it's addressed to them. And I hold these people in absolutely the highest of esteem. And I think the whole world should be behind America. Because clearly, we have to go as one. We are now moving into a different era. And we can't suddenly go as China, America, India, Korea. We've got to go as one. We are one species. Would I like to meet the base commander? Yes, I don't know whether it would be a man or a woman, actually. I would like to meet the base commander. This person has completely changed my life. There's an element of fear in my life because this is very dangerous what I've done and I'm doing. To fight 2 elections, I took on the mayor of Winchester to get elected, and I lost that election by just 27 votes. I then had to fight another election to get elected to be able to speak. Only people who are elected know the amount of effort that's gone in to get this far. On top of that, as I said, I live in fear of my life. I would like to meet the base commander. Not to be acrimonious, I'd just like to meet him. It would be really interesting. There's 1,000,001 questions I'd love to ask him. He probably wouldn't want to give me the answers. But it would be a fascinating experience. Well, I fervently believe that all the people that are elected in the Senate and the Congress should be aware of where we're at in our history now. And because the decisions that they make might be very different if they knew what I know, and particularly in how we deal with one another, and our goals and our ambitions, and where we've got to go. But we have some many, many difficult decisions to make in the near future, particularly to keep our planet going. So yes, that's what I'd like.
The Trilateral Commission is deliberately withholding evidence. Political paralysis caused by the Trilateral Commission. This